the term philosophy, what its etymological definition, and what's technical or conventional definition for later use. What is philosophy? What's its technical or conventional, and what's etymological definition? Your name? Kalkidan. Kalkidan what? Alamay, yes. What's etymology?
It's a set of view or belief about life in the universe.
Very good. It's a set of view and belief that underlies human living existence, knowledge, etc. Yes. What's etymological definition? Etymological definitions. What is the etymological definitions? The root meaning, philo and sophy, isn't it? It derived from two words, philo and sophy. What's philo means and what sophy means? Philo means love, sophy means wisdom. Etymologically, philosophy means love of wisdom. Technically, conventionally, philosophy is what? We have got narrower belief and broader, popular meaning. Popularly, publicly, philosophy means what? Belief, opinion, approach, perspective, etc. Right? Belief, opinion, perspective, approach, or etc. In the strict sense, in the academic sense, the word philosophy refers to what? It's a systematic, rational, and critical inquiry. Systematic, rational, and critical inquiry to the underlying thought and experience of human being. Right? Philosophy is not just simply a belief, an opinion, or a perspective, or an approach, but it's a systematic. It has got its own methodology, system to deal with its own issues. Right? Now, in order to define philosophy, the best way to define philosophy is to look into the pre-Socratics. Pre-Socratic philosophers. Who were the pre-Socratic philosophers? Pre means before. Before Socrates. Those who lived before the age of Socrates, some 500 or 600 before the birth of Christ, in the coastal area of the present-day Turkey, Italy, and Greek. Pre-Socratic philosophers. We have a list of around 15 pre-Socratic philosophers that we need to look into their ideas to define what philosophy is. Because they set the stage for the development of philosophy in later period. Right? Looking into the pre-Socratic philosophy is important because they were the earliest philosophers with recorded, organized philosophical thought. Right? Earliest philosophers or the pre-Socratic philosophers, right? The objective of the study of pre-Socratic philosophers or the earliest philosophers is to understand the historical context and the cultural factors. What are the historical context and cultural factors that influenced the development of philosophical thought? To define philosophy best, the best way is to look into the ideas of pre-Socratic philosophers, what kind of questions they were trying to tackle, to explore the contribution idea of earliest philosopher, examine case philosophical questions and inquiries posed by these early thinkers, and analyze the impact of early philosophical ideas on subsequent philosophical traditions, right? The earliest, the medieval and modern philosophical thought, one way or the other, is influenced by the pre-Socratic philosophers, right? We need to list down the pre-Socratic philosophers and look into separately what kind of questions that they were trying to grapple with, right? Studying the earliest pre-Socratic philosopher holds great significance in understanding the origin and development of philosophy. These thinkers lived when? 6th century before Christ, between 6 and 5 centuries before the birth of Christ, and they laid the groundwork for philosophical inquiries, right? Exploring their ideas, providing valuable insight to historical context and cultural factors that shaped philosophical perspective. Pre-Socratic philosophers emerged during the transformative period in ancient Greek. Why it's called transformative period? 5 or 6 centuries before the birth of Christ is termed as transformative period because it's characterized by the decline of mythological explanation and the rise of rational inquiry. Decline of mythology and rise of rational inquiry. Right? The pre-Socratics emerged during the transformative period, and there are certain cultural factors that facilitated the philosophical thought of the pre-Socratic philosophers. Greek societies valued reason, observation, and the pursuit of knowledge. Cultural factors. And they were influenced by the burgeoning field of mathematics, astronomy, and natural science itself. And they were highly influenced by the then religious thoughts and beliefs, more specifically the belief in Aphrodite, Greek gods, Aphrodite, Zeus, and Apollo. Right? They were one way or the other, directly or indirectly, they were influenced by the religious thoughts of their period. Plus, the pre-Socratics were also influenced by the concept of logos, which refers to the underlying order or principles, right? The Greek society used to believe in the principle of logos, the underlying thought, the underlying principle, the underlying ordering law behind everything, right? So such kind of assumptions, one way or the other, influenced the philosophical thought of the pre-Socratic philosophers. Who are the pre-Socratic philosophers? They're limited in numbers, around 50, 1-5 pre-Socratic philosophers, or the earliest philosophers, are 50 in numbers. And for the sake of understanding, it's better to classify them according to their school of thought. According to their school of thought. We have got 7 schools of thought that pre-Socratic philosophers are grouped to. The first school of thought is the Milesian school of thought, which consists of Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. Second is Heraclitean school of thought, which consists only Heraclitus. The third is Eleatic school of thought, Parmenides, Zeno, Melissus, and Xenophanes. Pluralist, Empedocles, and Anaxagoras. The atomist, Leucippus, Democritus. Pythagorean school of thought includes Pythagoras, and the sophists includes Protagoras and Gorgias. Right? We need to internalize these 50 pre-Socratic philosophers. In order to understand what philosophy is, we need to understand it from its very beginning, from its very source. What kind of questions they were trying to grapple with. The philosophical talk that have already been asked before the birth of Christ are continued to be asked in the medieval period, and they are still continue to be asked in the modern period. Unlike other disciplines, unlike other natural science, philosophical questions are kind of persistent, eternal questions. They are not kind of empirical or a kind of question that can be verifiable or observable through laboratory experimentations, but a kind of questions that can be clarified, further clarified, added, expounded, or etc. Right? Philosophical questions, unlike other natural science questions, or unlike other descriptive questions, they are kind of questions that need to be asked further, right? Then they are timeless questions, right? So Milesian. Now, why we need to classify philosophers according to their school of thought? School of thought means they have got certain common belief systems, right? The first school of thought is the Milesian school of thought. So the first question that you need to tackle is, what is the common feature of the Milesian school of thought? The Milesian school includes Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. They share some certain common features. Namely, the first is naturalistic explanations. The very first characteristic feature of the Milesian school of thought is they believed in naturalistic explanation. The philosophers of the Milesian school, they sought to provide naturalistic explanation for the phenomena observed in the world. They aimed to understand the underlying principle, the origin of the natural world, right? Unlike the previous thinkers, poets, they give more emphasis to the natural explanations rather than mythological or supernatural or transcendental explanation of the natural phenomena. Second feature is monism. The Milesian philosopher proposed that there is a single fundamental substance or element, or their word arche, A-R-C-H-E. A-R-C-H-E, the arche, or the primordial stuff from which everything is derived and to which everything is distracted or returned to it, right? They were monists. Monism is the central feature of the Milesian school of thought. Naturalistic explanation and rational inquiry. They believe in reason. Milesian school of thought believed in reason, the power of reason rather than mythological explanation. They sought to provide logical and coherent explanation for natural phenomena depending on observation and logical deduction rather than divine or mystical revelation. Materialism is another characteristic feature of Milesian philosophy. They focused on material explanation for the nature of reality. They believed that the fundamental substance as the basis of the universe, right? Unlike the subsequent school of thought, Milesian school of thought are materialists, right? The ultimate reality is something material, something tangible, or something concrete, something that can be perceived through five senses, right? Materialism is the central tenet, belief, characteristic feature of the Milesian school of thought. Natural laws, the Milesian philosopher believed in the existence of natural laws. They governed the behavior and transformation of fundamental substance, so, right? So their influence on natural explanation and rational inquiry is one of the key features that puts influence in later development of philosophy, right? The Milesian school of thought put more emphasis on the power of reason rather than the mythological or rational explanation of the natural phenomena, right? Now let's see the Milesian philosopher separately. Thales. Who was Thales and what is the central contribution of Thales in the development of philosophy? What is the fundamental stuff? What is the central question that the Milesian used to ask is what? What is the arche? What is the primordial stuff out of which everything is derived and towards which everything is distracted? What is the arche? For Thales, the arche is water. For Thales, the arche is water. Why do you think? Thales maintained that water is the ultimate reality. Why do you think? What is the argument that he forwarded? Support his argument that water is the ultimate reality. Because water is important for existence and sustenance of life. Because water is important for sustenance and existence of life. Water is abundant. It's the abundance of water. Abundance of water and transformative power of water. Water can transform itself in different states. So the ultimate reality for Thales must be water, because water is important, without which life is unthinkable, and water exists everywhere, everywhere. And water comes from the sky and bubbles out of the ground, and water has got some transformative power, can change itself in different states, liquid, physical, and gas state. Therefore, the ultimate stuff must be water. For Thales, the fundamental stuff is water. Thales believed that the earth was a flat disk floating on water, and that celestial bodies such as sun, moon, and the stars were also floating on water. Right? It seems to be very lame, very unsophisticated explanation for the nature of reality in the face of modern science and technology. In the face of modern science and technology, but it is a philosophy because it is a departure from mythological and spiritual explanation of the nature of the world, right? Thales was known for making accurate prediction, providing explanation for natural phenomena. For example, he correctly predicted solar eclipse. He made mathematical contribution, which is known as Thales theorem. What's Thales theorem? You know what Pythagorean theorem, right? The square of the longest side of a triangle is equals to the sum of the square of the other two sides. Thales theorem is what? A triangle inscribed in a semicircle is a right triangle. Right? This is a theorem proposed by Thales some 500 or 600 before the birth of Christ. He was a mathematician, and he had a practical achievement. He used his mathematical knowledge to measure the height of a pyramid and distance of the ship from the shore. He also advised on matter of irrigation and engineering, right? So the pre-Socratic philosophers, they were not simply philosophers, but they were also what? Practical advisors. Political advisors, or etc., as you can find in many other areas, right? Okay. The second is Anaximander. What is the arche for Anaximander? The arche for Thales is water. The arche for Anaximander is what? The arche refers to what? The fundamental stuff from which everything is derived and to which everything is returned. The arche for Anaximander is aperon. Aperon. Aperon refers to what? Infinite or boundless. He proposed that the fundamental substance of the universe is not a specific element like Thales or water, but it is an infinite or boundless. Infinite and boundless. As Thales is known in mathematics and cosmology, Anaximander is known in cartography and geography. Right? Anaximander is credited with creating one of the earliest known map of the world, and his map depicted known land of the time, including Mediterranean region, and was based on a cylindrical projection. This map marked a significant advancement in understanding geography and cartography. And the first concept of evolution is first proposed by whom? Before Charles Darwin, or whatever you have in the present contemporary period, Anaximander was the first to propose the idea of evolution, the concept of evolution. Speculated on the origin and development of life, he proposed that humans and other animals originally arose from primitive forms of life, suggesting a form of biological evolutions. He has taught on some ethics and metaphysics as well. The arche is aperon, unlimited. It's very elusive, complex concept. Why do you think Anaximander maintained that unlimited or infinite is the arche? The argument of Anaximander is that because the material substance such as water is somehow elusive, right? So the reality must be something non-material or aperon without any quality, indefinite or unlimited, right? Anaximenes, the arche is air, which is the argument of Anaximenes is very similar to Thales. The argument of Anaximenes is very much similar to Thales. Air must be the fundamental reality. What do you think? Can you propose possible explanation or argument why Anaximenes maintained that air is the fundamental reality from which everything is derived and to which everything is returned? Similar argument. One is air is important for the existence of life, and it is transformative power. Just like water, air can what? Transform itself into different states, liquid state, gas state, or solid state, right? So the argument is very similar to Thales, but unlike Thales, they give more scientific explanation for why he maintained that air is the ultimate reality. Scientific explanations. Thales' argument is more of common sense explanation, and whereas Anaximenes' explanation is more of scientific explanation. He came up with the concept of rarefaction and condensation. Rarefaction and condensation. Air can transform itself to the multitude of things in the world through the process of rarefaction and condensation. And furthermore, he maintained that there are space or areas where water is not accessible, in which you can get air. The omnipresence of air itself can make air to be the possible explanation of ultimate reality. Air can exist even in a desert, in which you can find no water, right? The omnipresent presence of air is the fundamental argument which takes as an explanation for the ultimate, as an ultimate reality, right? Anaximenes, air is a fundamental reality that can transform itself through process of condensation and rarefaction. He had his own contribution in ethical and psychological considerations. So the Milesian school of thought includes Anaximenes, Anaximander, and Thales. The second school of thought is Heraclitean school of thought. What is the central characteristic feature of Heraclitean school of thought? We have said monism, naturalistic explanation, and rational inquiry is the central tenet or characteristic feature of Milesian school of thought. The second school of thought, Heraclitean, shares something in common. What is that? The concept of flux and change. Flux, everything is in a constant state of flux. Heraclitean emphasized the idea that universe is in a constant state of change. They believe that change is not only characteristic of the physical world, but also extends to human existence. Everything in constant state of flux. Unity of opposites. Heraclitus, the founder of the Heraclitean school of thought, embraced the idea of unity of opposites, which Heraclitus himself proposed. He believed that opposites are interconnected, depend on each other for their existence. They saw dynamic interplay between opposite forces and consider contradiction and tension as an integral part of the world. The existence of opposite, the existence of contradiction as an integral, fundamental aspect of the world. Unity of opposite and the existence of flux and change is the central thematic characteristic feature of the Heraclitean school of thought. What is the arche for Heraclitus? The arche for Thales is water, for Anaximander is apron, Anaximenes is air. What is the arche for Heraclitus? Fire. Why do you think he maintained that fire is ultimate reality? In fact, he didn't explicitly maintain that fire is the ultimate reality, but he implicitly, indirectly, accepts the fact that fire is symbolic representation or a manifestation of the arche. Right? Fire is not a physical arche, but a kind of primordial, substantial arche. Rather, Heraclitus maintained that logos is the arche. He directly maintains in his various writings, logos is the fundamental stuff from which everything is derived and to which everything is returned to, right? Logos is what's fundamental, underlying principle, which controls and which manipulates the changing world, which manipulates the ever-changing world. There is something unchanging under the changing world. There's something unchanging that controls the changing world, which he calls logos, right? So fire is a symbolic representation of logos. Fire is symbolic representation of logos. Why? Because in fire, we see a constant change. We see constant flux. Constant flux. Fire is characterized by constant state of destruction and constant state of renewal. And fire can consume everything to make them wet and dry. It can consume everything, changing their properties in a completely different properties, right? So fire can be considered as an arche for Heraclitus as water can be considered for Thales, right? Heraclitean epistemology puts significant influence on the development of philosophy in later period. Because Heraclitus believed that knowledge is not statics, but it's acquired through an active engagement with the world and through the recognition of pattern and relation in the flux of reality, right? Everything is changing, including knowledge, including the reality itself, right? This is the fundamental assumptions or strong conviction of Heraclitean school of thought. It put significant influence on the development of philosophy in later period, more specifically the thought of Karl Marx, historical materialism or dialectical materialism, one way or the other, is influenced by the philosophy of Heraclitus, right? Change, the concept of change, the concept of flux is central to the fundamental philosophy of Heraclitus. Heraclitus is also known by his aphorism, which is known as, you cannot step twice in the same river. What does that mean? Right? You cannot step twice in the same river. It's a kind of aphorism or saying which is ascribed to Heraclitus to denote the ever-fluxing nature of reality, ever-changing nature of reality. Not only reality, but knowledge itself is ever-changing. So the emphasis on recognizing patterns and relationship in an attempt to acquire knowledge is the central concept of the Heraclitean philosophy, right? Heraclitus is reality is changing. The third school of thought is the Eleatic school of thought, which is a direct contrast with Heraclitean school of thought. Heraclitus maintains that knowledge or reality is changing. The Eleatic school of thought maintains that knowledge is absolutely eternal, unchanging. The Eleatic school of thought refers to a group of ancient Greek philosophers who were associated with the town of Ilia in the present-day Italy. They lived in the same period as the Heraclitean or Milesian philosophers. The central tenet is they believed in monism, just like Milesian school of thought. But unlike the Milesian school of thought, the fundamental stuff from which everything is derived is not material. It's a kind of conceptual. It's a kind of conceptual or metaphysical in its nature. They come up with the concept of being, capital B, or the one, that can be discovered only conceptual abstraction and logical argumentation. Right? They believe in the doctrine of monism, just like the Milesian school of thought, but unlike the Milesian school of thought, being or reality is not material. It is abstract, conceptual in its nature. Right? The concept of being, Parmenides, the founder of Eleatic school of thought, presented a metaphysical system centered around the concept of being. Being is eternal, immutable, indivisible, and indestructible. That can be discovered only through abstractions, right? For the Milesian, reality can be discovered by observing the natural phenomena and by driving patterns and relationships. But according to the Eleatic school of thought, reality cannot be understood through observations or experimentation or verification, but something that can be studied conceptually. Zeno paradox is central to Eleatic school of thought. What is Zeno paradox? Have you ever heard? Zeno paradox, or the competition between the Achilles and tortoise. Achilles and tortoise. It's a kind of conceptual experimentation on the relationship between the most fastest animal on the earth, which is Achilles, and the most slowest tortoise. He asks us to imagine a situation in which Achilles and tortoise were set in a competition, and tortoise were given a head to begin the competition, right? Zeno maintained that Achilles cannot overtake the tortoise. No matter, Achilles is fastest. Because the moment Achilles begins to overtake the tortoise, Achilles has to cover half of the distance. Half of the distance. And then it needs to cover another half of the distance. And it continues, infinite, unlimited. The distance between Achilles and tortoise is first 0.1, then next 0.001, next 0.001. It goes what? Infinite. Can you mathematically solve that particular problem? Yes, it's impossible. It goes infinite. This kind of paradox is known as Zeno paradox. But recently, modern mathematicians tend to solve such problem by introducing the concept of what? Calculus and limit. The concept of infinite series. They propose the concept of infinite series to approach this kind of problems. But Zeno paradox, but still they were not able to give satisfactory answer to such kind of paradox. It's impossible to give satisfactory answer to Zeno paradox, right? No matter how Achilles is fastest and tortoise is slowest, Achilles cannot overtake the tortoise. Because it's impossible to bring the difference between tortoise and Achilles to zero, right? Such kind of paradox is a kind of elaboration or a kind of argument in order to supplement the argument of Parmenides. The same thing is true for Melissus. And the ultimate reality is an infinite being, right? So the Eleatic school of thought denied the concept of motion and change. Motion and change are what? Illusion. They're just simply appearance of our sensory perception. But in reality, everything is constant, indivisible, and unchanging, right? So the contribution of the Eleatic school of thought for the second development of philosophy is their emphasis on logical reasoning. Emphasis on logical reasoning and their concept on being, which is also known as the concept of ontology. You have already been familiar with the concept of ontology. It's a branch of metaphysics that's concerned with the nature of reality. It itself is introduced by the Eleatic school of thought, more specifically by the Parmenides, right? Ontology is one of the central contributions of the Eleatic school of thought, the nature of reality, the immutable, indestructible, or indivisible nature of reality, right? The Zeno paradox and the Melissus concept of the infinite being is contribution of the Eleatic school of thought. Eleatic school of thought is known by the concept of being, or the one, the one. The pluralist school of thought shares something in common with Milesian school of thought. They maintain that something material is the real thing. But unlike the Milesian school of thought, as the name implies, they were pluralist. Pluralist means reality is plural. Reality is plural. The arche, or the fundamental stuff from which everything is derived, is not a single thing, but a plural multiplicity of things. It includes Anaxagoras and Empedocles. Anaxagoras concept is centered around the concept of seed or homoimeries. They are multiple in number. Unlike water, air, or fire, they come up with pluralist approach to the fundamental nature of reality. Anaxagoras proposed the idea of seed, which is controlled, managed by the concept of nous, N-O-U-S, or mind. As logos for Heraclitus, nous or mind are for Anaxagoras, central principles that controls the seed. Anaxagoras are pluralists. Empedocles is just nothing but the amalgamation of the previous philosophers. What were the previous arches? Water, air, and fire. Empedocles come up with the combination of these three elements, adding the fourth one, which is earth. Right? Earth, air, fire, and water are the ultimate reality. Believe that these elements were eternal and unchangeable, and all things in the world were composed of different combinations of this element. Empedocles proposed the idea of love and strife. Love brings things together, strife sets them apart. Right? Empedocles is a pluralist which combines these four elements as a possible explanation for the ultimate reality. The atomists can be considered as the pluralists. The atomists, they have already been known by Democritus. What is central arche for Democritus? In your chemistry, central arche is? The arche is? The fundamental stuff is what? Atom, right? Atom is introduced by Democritus. The concept of atoms is introduced by Democritus before they were developed in the hands of John Dalton in the recent period, in the 9th or 18th century. Democritus introduced the concept of atoms, and Leucippus, known as the atomist, developed a sophisticated atom theory as part of pluralist school. They proposed that the fundamental concept of reality is indivisible, indestructible particles called atoms. These atoms are infinite in number and different size and shape in agreement. And according to the atomist, all objective phenomena in the world are the result of motion and combination of these atoms, right? Atoms has got certain properties, etc., etc. Pythagorean, you have already been accustomed in your math lesson. Pythagorean. The word philosophy itself is ascribed to Pythagoras. Pythagoras is known by his triangle theorem. What is the arche for Pythagoras? As water is for Thales and fire for Heraclitus, what is the arche? Pythagoras maintains that numbers, relationship of numbers, right? Central tenet or basic common feature of Pythagoras' school of thought is numerology and mathematics. Pythagoreans believed in the fundamental role of number in the structure of the universe. They saw number as the key to understanding reality and believed that all things could be described and explained through numerical relationships. They explored mathematical concepts and relationships with them as expression of harmony in the cosmos. They even extend the idea of number to understand the nature of metaphysics and cosmology. They come up with the concept of music of the sphere, which maintains that celestial bodies produce harmonious sounds and as they move in their orbit, reflecting mathematical relationship, right? Everything is number, including reality. From the Pythagorean school of thought, reality can be explained in terms of number. In the ethical and spiritual teaching, the Pythagorean emphasized the pursuit of ethical development, and they believed in the doctrine of the transmigration of the soul. The Pythagorean believed in reincarnation or transmigration of the soul. So what is the influence of Pythagorean school for later development of philosophy? Emphasis on abstraction and speculation on the nature of reality. More specifically, the philosophy of Plato. Plato is influenced, inspired by Pythagoras. reality can be understood by mathematical relationship of numbers. Pythagoreans believed in number. So the last school of thought is sophistic school of thought. We get a kind of departure or discontinuity about questions when we come to the sophistic school of thought. Sophist. The word sophist nowadays is associated with what? Sophist. Right? The word sophist somehow negatively used in our day-to-day conversation. Person A or person X or person Y is sophist means he tended to use terminology manipulatively in order to assert what he or she wants to assert without giving intellectual honesty. They don't give much care to intellectual content, but their emphasis on rhetorics, persuasions, or getting others accept what they want to accept without giving for credit to objective facts or objective realities or etc. Right? So the sophists include Protagoras and Gorgias. Central tenet or characteristic feature of sophists is rhetorics and persuasion. They were not obsessed with the question of the arche or the ultimate reality. They were not concerned with the fundamental stuff from which everything is derived, into which everything is returned to, but they're concerned with training more practical skills that are important for success in public and political life. Sophist includes what? Protagoras and Gorgias. Protagoras and Gorgias, they're concerned with persuasion and rhetorics, and they believed in relativism and skepticism, as the school of thought itself is originated by the sophists, by the Pythagoras. Man is a measure of all things. The sophists questioned the existence of absolute truth and emphasized subjective nature of knowledge and perception. They argued that truth is relative to individual. Truth and knowledge is just nothing but an individual product, an individual perspective. What is true and what is true to me may not be true to you, true to them may not be true to us, or etc. Right? Relativism and skepticism is the central tenet of sophistic school of thought. More specifically, Protagoras humanism, man is the measure of all things, is what is central tenet or aphorism or sophistic school of thought. What do you understand by this phrase? Man is the measure of all things. What do you understand? Protagoras, one of the prominent sophists, is known by his famous aphorism, man is the measure of all things. Right? This is the central idea in which relativism and skepticism centered around, right? Man is the measure of all things means knowledge and truth are shaped by human perspective. Knowledge and truth and reality are shaped by human perspective, that individuals have the power to interpret and give meaning to their experience, right? Right? They inspired relativism and skepticism in later development of philosophy, right? The medieval or the modern itself is one way, or the other is influenced by Protagoras and Gorgias, the relativism. And rhetorics as a skill is emphasized by the sophist school of thought. Unfortunately, sophist school of thoughts are currently being criticized. Criticism is one of the central major feature of the sophistic school of thought. They suffers. Why? Because they give more value to what? To persuasion, rather than the content of the argument. They give more value, more importance, more credit to get other accept what they want to accept, rather than giving evidence or fact, the foundation or the content of the argument, right? The sophist is, that's why the word sophist itself is negatively used in our day-to-day conversation, right? Person X is sophist means he's highly persuasive. The sophist movement faced criticism from other philosophers, notably from Plato and Aristotle, who accused them of moral relativism, manipulation of language, intellectual dishonesty, negative reputation associated with sophist, right? So these are the 7 schools of thought that laid the foundation for development of philosophy in later period. Milesian, Heraclitean, Eleatic, the pluralist, Pythagoras, and sophist school of thought. Include 15 individual philosophers who have got some certain feature in common, right? In order to understand what philosophy means, we need to grapple with questions which the pre-Socratics used to grapple with. Unlike other natural science disciplines, philosophy is characterized by grappling with questions which are eternal or timeless in their nature.